deputy observed. The room appeared undisturbed. The bed was neatly made, the television was off, and Vaughn's overnight bag sat unopened near the chair. His jacket hung carefully over the backrest. His wallet, keys, and watch were placed in a straight line on the nightstand. Vaughn's phone was found face down near the center of the room. It was powered off. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken objects, and no evidence of forced entry. The bathroom sink was dry, and the shower showed no signs of recent use. Security footage from the motel showed Vaughn entering his room at 8:16. No footage showed him leaving. The hallway camera covering his door recorded no activity from 9:20 onward. No other guests or staff members were seen approaching that section of the building overnight. A missing person report was filed that evening. During evidence processing, Vaughn's phone was powered on at the police station. The battery level was at 31%, consistent with being unplugged sometime during the night. There were no missed calls, emergency alerts, or drafts. While reviewing the phone's photo gallery, an officer noticed a single image that did not fit the timeline. The photograph was timestamped at 11:58 that night. It showed Vaughn standing inside the motel room near the foot of the bed, facing the camera. Vaughn's expression was neutral. His eyes were open and focused slightly above the lens, as if looking at something just beyond the phone. His arms hung loosely at his sides. There was no visible blur, suggesting he was standing still. The image was well composed. Based on the angle, the phone appeared to have been placed on the dresser across the room. The photograph had been taken using the rear camera. There was no reflection in the mirror showing another person. The most immediate concern involved the lighting. The room was fully illuminated by the overhead light, casting even shadows across the walls and floor. However, motel maintenance records showed that the overhead fixture in that room had been disconnected weeks earlier. The motel manager confirmed this detail. That room had been part of the renovation wing and had only recently been reopened due to demand. While basic cleaning had been completed, electrical repairs were still pending. The overhead light switch did nothing when tested earlier that evening. Maintenance logs supported the claim. Power to that specific circuit had been shut off since mid-January. There were no records indicating it had been restored. Investigators questioned whether the photograph could have been taken earlier, then misdated. Digital forensics specialists examined the file metadata. The timestamp matched the phone's internal clock, which was accurate and synced to network time earlier that day. There were no signs of editing, manipulation, or file corruption. Compression patterns matched other images Vaughn had taken during inspections the previous week. The photograph appeared to be a single original capture. Another detail raised concern. In the background of the image, the bathroom doorway was visible. A shadow extended across the bathroom wall at an angle that did not match Vaughn's position or the known layout of the room. There was no lamp or external light source capable of producing it. Investigators returned to the motel to recreate the photograph. Using the same phone model and camera settings, they attempted to produce similar lighting conditions. Without the overhead light, the room remained dim even with curtains open during daylight. No configuration matched the image. While examining the room again, an officer noticed something partially concealed behind the dresser. A narrow door was set into the wall, its frame painted the same color as the room. The door led to an adjoining room. The adjoining room had been sealed for years due to structural damage. Its windows were boarded from the outside, and the floor sloped noticeably toward the center. There was no electricity, no furniture, and no active utilities. Dust patterns inside the adjoining room suggested it had not been entered recently. However, the lock mechanism on the connecting door showed fresh scuff marks, as if it had been opened and closed multiple times. No fingerprints suitable for identification were recovered from the handle. Further investigation into motel records revealed that the adjoining room had been removed from service following an incident over a decade earlier. An overnight guest had been found unresponsive and pronounced dead at the scene. The death was ruled a medical event, and no criminal activity was suspected. After that incident, the room experienced repeated electrical issues and water damage. Eventually, it was boarded up and excluded from public bookings. The connecting door had been sealed from the other side, but left intact within Vaughn's room. This information had not been disclosed to Vaughn. Investigators also reviewed Vaughn's phone usage logs more closely. At 11:56, 2 minutes before the photograph was taken, the phone recorded a brief sensor activation consistent with movement. There was no corresponding screen unlock or app usage. At 12:01, the phone powered down without user input. Battery data suggested it had not reached a critical level. Weeks later, while the phone was stored in an evidence locker, it powered on briefly without explanation. Surveillance cameras captured the screen lighting up, though no notification appeared. The device shut off again after several seconds. Phone carrier records later showed a 4-second outgoing call attempt from Vaughn's phone during that event. The call did not connect. The destination number was not recorded. The call was traced to a motel landline associated with Vaughn's room. That landline had been physically disconnected since renovations began. The investigation stalled with no physical evidence explaining Vaughn's disappearance. No sightings were reported, no financial activity occurred after the night he checked in. His vehicle remained parked until it was towed days later. The motel owner chose to permanently close that wing of the building. The adjoining door was sealed behind drywall. Power to the entire section was shut off. Within months, the property was sold. Vaughn Mercer was never found. His case remains open. The photograph remains archived in the case file. It is the only confirmed image showing a man standing calmly inside a motel room that records indicate should have been dark, disconnected, and empty at the time it was taken. This highway turnout appears, then erases people. According to State Transportation Archives, a highway turnout briefly appeared on official maps before multiple travelers connected to it vanished without trace. In late August of 2016, a civil engineering surveyor named Nolan Bricks was assigned to document erosion along a remote stretch of interstate cutting through high desert terrain. Nolan was 43 years old and had spent most of his career evaluating road safety, drainage failures, and shoulder degradation in low-traffic regions. His work often placed him alone on long, empty highways for hours at a time. The assignment that week was considered low risk. Nolan was to drive a 100-mile segment, stop at pre-marked mile points, photograph runoff damage, and log shoulder conditions. The route passed through barren land with minimal development and few exits. Cell service was inconsistent, but Nolan carried a state-issued satellite tracker for emergencies. On Monday morning, Nolan checked in with the regional office and began driving eastbound just after 7. His first 3 stops went as expected. Photos were uploaded during brief service windows, and his tracker showed steady movement along the route. At 10:23, Nolan made an unplanned stop. His vehicle data later showed a turn signal activation followed by deceleration at mile marker 87. There was no scheduled turnout listed there in the survey plan. However, Nolan's dash camera recorded a narrow paved pull-off on the right shoulder, marked by a faded reflective sign reading Scenic Rest. The turnout was small, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles. Beyond it, the desert stretched flat and quiet, broken only by low scrub and distant rock formations. Nolan pulled in, parked, and shut off his engine. He exited the vehicle and walked several steps away, holding his camera. The dash camera continued recording for another 3 minutes. It captured Nolan framing shots of the pavement edge and surrounding ground. At one point, he looked toward the highway with a puzzled expression, then glanced back at the turnout sign. He appeared to check his tablet, then looked up again. At 10:29, Nolan walked out of frame. The dash camera showed only the empty turnout and open desert. The recording ended normally when the vehicle battery entered sleep mode. When Nolan failed to check in at noon, the regional office attempted contact. Calls went unanswered. His tracker showed no movement after 10:30. By mid-afternoon, supervisors initiated a welfare check through Highway Patrol. Troopers reached mile marker 87 just before 5. They found Nolan's state vehicle parked on the shoulder, but the turnout was gone. In its place was a continuous stretch of asphalt with no paved pull-off. There was no sign, no widened shoulder, and no tire marks leading away from the road. The vehicle sat partially on gravel, hazard lights off, doors unlocked. Nolan was not inside. His camera, tablet, and safety vest were on the passenger seat. His keys were in the ignition. There were no signs of a struggle or collision. Troopers searched the immediate area, assuming Nolan may have wandered off due to heat or disorientation. The terrain was flat and offered no cover. Visibility extended for miles. No footprints were found beyond the shoulder. The dash camera footage was reviewed that evening. Investigators confirmed it showed a turnout that did not exist at the location where the vehicle was found. Road design plans, satellite imagery, and maintenance records showed no turnout had ever been approved or constructed at mile marker 87. At first, officials suspected a mapping error or an old removed pull-off. However, asphalt aging patterns on the dash camera footage showed the turnout surface matched the condition of the active highway. There were no seams or signs of demolition. Further review revealed Nolan was not the first to stop there. Archived traffic camera data from previous months showed at least 4 vehicles slowing near the same mile marker, signaling right, then accelerating again without stopping. In 2 cases, brake lights activated fully, then disengaged abruptly, as if the drivers changed their minds at the last second. One case stood out. 6 months earlier, a long-haul truck driver named Mrballen had reported pulling into a rest turnout that did not appear on his GPS. He claimed the turnout felt wrong and that his truck stalled briefly before restarting on its own. He did not stop long and reported no incident, but the location matched mile marker 87. Investigators contacted Everett, who confirmed his report. He described the turnout as quiet and oddly clean, with no trash or tire marks. He said the highway noise faded almost completely once he pulled in. When asked why he left, Everett said he felt like staying longer would be a mistake. After Nolan disappeared, the transportation department quietly reviewed accident and missing person reports along the same highway. 2 additional cases surfaced. In 2009, a college student driving overnight was reported missing after last pinging near mile marker 87. His car was found intact 40 miles away at a gas station, keys still inside. He was never found. In 2012, a retired couple traveling cross-country failed to arrive at their destination. Their vehicle was discovered abandoned at a rest stop 2 exits west. Credit card records showed no activity after passing mile marker 87. At the time, none of the cases were linked. Nolan's disappearance forced a closer look. Investigators returned repeatedly to mile marker 87, attempting to document any irregularities. For weeks, nothing appeared. The shoulder remained narrow and uninterrupted. Then, 3 weeks later, during a dawn patrol, a highway maintenance worker named Lyle Corrin reported seeing a pull-off appear briefly in the early light. He described it as a mirage at first, but said it solidified as he approached. Lyle slowed, but did not stop. As he passed the marker, he said the turnout vanished behind him, replaced by normal shoulder. His dashboard camera captured a single blurred frame showing a reflective sign not present in the next frame. That footage was timestamped 6:14 in the morning. State officials closed the investigation publicly, citing lack of evidence. Internally, the site was flagged. Crews were instructed not to stop near mile marker 87 for any reason unless absolutely necessary. Despite this, another incident occurred in 2018. A rideshare driver transporting a passenger across state lines reported that his navigation system rerouted unexpectedly, instructing him to pull over for a rest break. The passenger later told police that the driver slowed near mile marker 87, then suddenly accelerated and refused to explain why. The driver quit the platform weeks later and declined further contact. Satellite imagery reviewed years later showed subtle inconsistencies at the site. On certain dates, the highway shoulder appeared wider by several feet. On others, it did not. The changes did not align with construction schedules or maintenance records. Nolan Bricks was officially declared missing and presumed deceased after 1 year. His family received no explanation beyond the known facts. The state quietly adjusted digital maps, removing any transient data linked to the turnout. Internal memos referred to it only as the transient pull-off anomaly. Today, mile marker 87 remains an unremarkable stretch of highway to most drivers. There is no sign, no widened shoulder, and no reason to slow down. But archived footage, vehicle logs, and witness statements all confirm the same detail. For brief moments, a turnout appears where none should exist. And when someone chooses to stop there, they do not always return. The night guard heard his own voice from an empty floor. According to internal security logs, an audio recording captured a night guard speaking from a floor that was confirmed empty at the time. In early February of 2017, a contracted night security guard named Lucas Wren was assigned to a regional medical storage facility on the outskirts of a mid-sized city. Lucas was 38 years old and had worked overnight security jobs for nearly a decade, mostly at warehouses, office parks, and inactive campuses. His role at the facility was simple. He was to monitor cameras, perform hourly patrols, and report any irregular activity to a central dispatch service. The building was large but quiet. It held archived medical equipment, sealed records, and unused administrative offices spread across 5 floors. Only the first floor remained active during daytime hours. The upper floors were locked, unlit, and officially unused. Overnight, Lucas was the only person inside the building. Lucas began his shift at 10 in the evening. He signed in at the security desk, checked the alarm panel, and confirmed all access points were secure. Camera feeds showed empty hallways and inactive elevators. Motion sensors were armed on floors 2 through 5, set to trigger silent alerts if activated. The first few hours passed without incident. Lucas completed his 11 o'clock patrol of the first floor, checked exterior doors, and logged normal conditions. At midnight, he settled back into the security office to monitor feeds and complete paperwork. At 12:47, a motion alert appeared on the console. It indicated movement on the 4th floor, east wing. Lucas froze, staring at the screen. The 4th floor had been closed for over 3 years. No staff had access, and the elevator required a supervisor keycard to reach that level. Lucas pulled up the camera feed for the east wing corridor. The hallway lights were off, as expected. The camera showed an empty corridor with storage doors lining the walls. No movement was visible. Assuming a sensor error, Lucas acknowledged the alert and noted it in the log. Motion sensors occasionally triggered due to temperature changes. He waited for a follow-up alert. None came. At 1:15, the console displayed another alert. This time, it was an audio pickup notification from the same area. The building system included passive microphones in unused wings to detect unusual sounds like breaking glass or forced entry. Lucas opened the audio feed. What came through his headset made him pull it off instinctively. He replayed the clip immediately. The recording contained a man's voice speaking clearly in the otherwise silent corridor. The voice said, "Security to dispatch, 4th floor east wing is clear." The tone was calm and professional, matching standard patrol language. It was Lucas's voice. The timestamp showed 1:13 in the morning. At that exact time, Lucas had been seated at the security desk on the 1st floor. Dispatch logs confirmed he had not made any radio call. Lucas checked the radio unit beside him. It was powered on, but showed no recent transmissions. He had not pressed the call button. Trying to stay rational, Lucas assumed the system had glitched and replayed an old recording. He checked the file properties. The audio was newly created, stored as a fresh clip, and linked to the 4th floor microphone. His pulse quickened as he pulled up live camera feeds again. The 4th floor remained dark and empty. No doors opened. No shadows moved. Lucas contacted Central Dispatch to report a possible system malfunction. He explained that an audio pickup had captured a voice matching his own. The dispatcher acknowledged the report and advised him to continue monitoring while they checked system diagnostics. At 1:36, another audio alert triggered. This time, Lucas did not remove his headset. He listened as the recording played. "Patrol complete. No issues noted," the voice said. Again, it was unmistakably Lucas. Same cadence, same slight rasp, same phrasing he used during every shift. The timestamp showed 1:34. Lucas felt a wave of unease. He checked his activity log. At 1:34, he had been writing notes and sipping coffee. The security desk camera confirmed he had not left his chair. Dispatch called back moments later. They reported no system errors and no evidence of looping audio. The dispatcher asked Lucas to confirm his location verbally. Lucas did so, stating clearly that he was on the first floor and had not patrolled the fourth. There was a pause on the line before the dispatcher replied. She told Lucas that, according to their system, a patrol acknowledgement had been received from the fourth floor microphone moments earlier. At this point, protocol required visual confirmation. Lucas was instructed to conduct a physical check of the area. Reluctantly, Lucas grabbed his flashlight and radio. He rode the elevator to the third floor since the fourth floor button remained inactive without a supervisor card. From there, he used the stairwell to reach the fourth floor door. The stairwell light flickered as he climbed. When he reached the door, he unlocked it using the emergency override key issued for patrols. The door opened into darkness. Lucas swept his flashlight across the corridor. It was exactly as shown on camera. Empty, silent, and undisturbed. Dust on the floor showed no footprints. Storage doors were closed and sealed. He walked the length of the east wing slowly, announcing his presence as trained. His voice echoed softly down the hall. No response came. After completing the patrol, Lucas returned to the stairwell and locked the door behind him. He descended back to the first floor and reported the area clear. At 2:18, another audio alert triggered. Lucas did not open the clip right away. He stared at the screen, watching the timestamp count upward. When he finally played it, his stomach dropped. The recording captured his voice again, but this time it sounded closer to the microphone. The voice said, "Still here, just finished checking storage doors." Lucas felt cold. He had not said those words during his patrol. The phrasing was similar, but not identical to anything he had spoken. Dispatch logs showed no radio traffic from Lucas at that time, yet the system marked the message as an internal audio capture, not a transmission. Lucas reviewed the live feed from the fourth floor microphone. It was silent. At 2:40, motion sensors on the fourth floor triggered again, this time in the west wing. Cameras still showed nothing. Dispatch instructed Lucas to remain on the first floor and await backup. A supervisor was dispatched from another site with an estimated arrival time of 40 minutes. While waiting, Lucas reviewed previous shift logs. He discovered something unsettling. Over the past 6 months, there were 3 instances where audio alerts had been logged overnight from the fourth floor. In each case, the recordings were brief and marked as system noise. No one had reviewed them closely. Lucas opened the archived files. Each clip contained a male voice speaking patrol-style phrases. The voice was not clearly identified in the notes, but to Lucas, it sounded uncomfortably similar to his own. The earliest clip was dated November of 2016, months before Lucas was assigned to the site. At 3:11, the supervisor arrived and entered the building. Together, they reviewed the logs and audio files. The supervisor agreed the voice sounded like Lucas, but could not explain how that was possible. They conducted a joint patrol of the fourth floor. Again, nothing was found. By morning, the incident was escalated to facility management. An internal investigation was launched. Audio equipment on the fourth floor was inspected and tested. No faults were found. No stored recordings matched the ones captured that night. The conclusion listed the event as an unexplained audio anomaly. Lucas requested reassignment and was granted it within a week. He refused to work night shifts after that. Before leaving the site, Lucas was asked to review one final clip discovered during a deeper system audit. The recording was timestamped 2013, long before Lucas worked security at all. The voice on the recording used his exact phrasing, his exact tone, and ended with the words, "End of shift." The fourth floor remains closed. Audio monitoring was later disabled. The recordings remain archived, labeled clearly with date, time, and location. They are the only documented instances of a night guard's voice being heard performing duties on a floor where no one was present, including the guard himself. This abandoned cabin recorded breathing with no one inside. According to county evidence logs, an audio recorder captured steady human breathing inside an abandoned cabin while the structure was confirmed empty. In late October of 2018, a wildlife monitoring technician named Aaron Kells was assigned to service passive recording equipment in a protected forest basin. Aaron was 42 years old and had worked seasonal contracts for over 15 years, specializing in acoustic monitoring of animal movement and illegal hunting activity. His job often required long hikes to isolated locations where equipment could remain undisturbed for months. The cabin sat deep within the basin, more than 6 miles from the nearest access road. It had been built decades earlier for fire watch crews, but was abandoned after repeated structural issues. The roof sagged, the windows were boarded, and the interior was considered unsafe for occupancy. Entry was restricted except for authorized monitoring work. Aaron arrived at the trailhead just after sunrise. He checked in by radio, noted clear weather conditions, and began hiking toward the cabin with a pack containing fresh batteries, data cards, and a handheld recorder. The device was designed to activate when sound exceeded a low threshold, capturing audio clips for later review. The plan was simple. Aaron would replace the recorder mounted inside the cabin, test it briefly, then leave before dusk. He had performed similar work dozens of times without incident. When Aaron reached the cabin shortly after noon, he performed a standard exterior check. The door was secured with a steel latch and numbered seal. The seal was intact. No footprints surrounded the structure, and no wildlife signs were present near the entrance. Aaron unlocked the door, entered briefly, and swapped the recorder mounted near the back wall. The interior smelled of dust and rot. Light filtered through cracks in the boards, but visibility was poor. He completed the task in under 10 minutes, relocked the door, applied a new seal, and noted the serial number in his log. Before leaving, Aaron activated a secondary recorder placed beneath the floorboards, intended to capture vibrations and low-frequency sounds. He tested it by clapping once inside the cabin. The device responded as expected. Aaron exited, secured the door again, and began the hike back toward the trailhead. He checked out by radio at 4:30 and left the basin before nightfall. 2 weeks later, Aaron returned to the office to process the collected data. Most of the recordings were uneventful. Wind, distant animal movement, and occasional tree creaks filled the files. Then he reached a set of clips time-stamped 3 days after his visit. The first clip lasted 20 seconds. It contained a faint, rhythmic sound. Aaron adjusted the volume and listened closely. It was breathing. The sound was slow and steady, clearly human in cadence. Inhale, exhale, pause, repeat. There was no accompanying movement, no footsteps, and no wind interference. Like slow in Mani 2045 and Mani Docs 10, and the redisting of you unsubscribe on the problem site at Raise Docs 10. The microphone sensitivity matched the profile of someone standing or sitting very close to the device. Aaron flagged the clip and reviewed the next file. The second clip was longer. The breathing continued, joined briefly by a subtle fabric rustle, as if clothing shifted. No speech occurred. The sound stopped abruptly at the end of the recording window. Over the next hour, Aaron identified 11 separate clips captured over a 4-hour period. All contained the same breathing pattern. The intervals between clips suggested the source remained inside the cabin for an extended time. Concerned, Aaron reported the anomaly to his supervisor. The supervisor reviewed the files and agreed the audio did not match known wildlife patterns. The cadence was too regular, and the frequency range matched adult human respiration. A site inspection was scheduled for the following morning. A team of 3, including a ranger and a safety officer, returned to the cabin. They approached cautiously, documenting the seal on the door before entry. The seal, applied by Aaron, remained intact and unbroken. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. Dust patterns on the floor were undisturbed. No food, clothing, or personal items were present. The recorder sat in its mounting bracket untouched. The team removed the device and reviewed its internal logs. The timestamps matched the audio files. The recorder had activated repeatedly without registering any door movement or vibration spikes consistent with entry. Investigators expanded the inspection to the surrounding area. No footprints were found, no evidence of camping or sheltering appeared nearby. The nearest trail showed no signs of recent use. Back at the office, the audio files were sent to an external acoustic analyst. The analyst confirmed the sounds were consistent with human breathing at close range. The pattern showed subtle variations typical of a living person, not mechanical noise or looping audio. The possibility of contamination was considered. Technicians verified the recorder model had no storage of prior audio and no wireless capability. Each clip was captured live and written directly to the data card. Another anomaly emerged during analysis. In two of the clips, a second sound appeared beneath the breathing. It was extremely faint but rhythmic, resembling a slow footstep on wood. The interval suggested someone shifting weight periodically, though no creaking typical of the cabin structure was present. Weather data was reviewed. On the day of the recordings, temperatures dropped sharply overnight, but wind speeds remained low. There were no storms or seismic activity. The investigation broadened. Archived data from the same cabin was reviewed, spanning the previous 5 years. 3 earlier instances surfaced. In 2012, a short clip captured a single exhale followed by silence. It was dismissed as wind interference at the time. In 2015, a recorder logged intermittent breathing sounds for nearly an hour. The file was marked as corrupted and archived without review. In 2017, a ranger reported hearing faint sounds inside the cabin during a routine exterior check. The report was informal and never escalated. None of those incidents had resulted in a confirmed explanation. To rule out unauthorized entry, the team installed motion sensors and an additional camera outside the cabin. The cabin remained sealed. Over the next month, no movement was detected. Then, during the 3rd week of monitoring, another set of breathing recordings appeared. This time, the audio was closer and louder. In one clip, a brief whisper-like sound occurred, though no words could be identified. The sound profile suggested the source was directly above the recorder. Investigators reviewed the external camera footage corresponding to the timestamps. The cabin exterior remained unchanged. No doors opened, no shadows past the windows. A structural engineer examined the cabin and confirmed there were no crawl spaces large enough to conceal a person. The floorboards were intact. The walls contained no voids beyond insulation. The county classified the recordings as unexplained biological audio events. The cabin was removed from active monitoring. All equipment was retrieved, and access to the site was restricted further. Aaron Kells completed his contract later that year and declined to renew. He stated he no longer felt comfortable working isolated assignments. The recordings remain stored in the county archive, labeled with time, date, and location. They are the only confirmed instances of sustained human breathing captured inside a sealed structure with no evidence of entry. The cabin still stands in the basin, locked and unused. No one has been assigned to enter it since. Dispatch logs from this town end abruptly at the same minute. According to regional emergency archives, every dispatch log from a single town stopped recording at exactly the same minute without explanation. In early April of 2019, a communications analyst named Victor Rowe was assigned to audit archived emergency records from several rural municipalities. Victor was 46 years old and worked for a state oversight contractor responsible for reviewing data integrity, response timing, and equipment compliance. His work was usually uneventful, involving long hours comparing timestamps and cross-checking call summaries. One town in particular drew his attention almost immediately. The town was small, isolated, and surrounded by farmland and low forest. It operated a combined dispatch center handling police, fire, and medical calls for a population under 4,000. Nothing about it suggested unusual activity. Response times were average, call volume was low, staffing was minimal but consistent. What stood out was the ending. Every dispatch log across every system ended at the same minute. Victor noticed it while reviewing call summaries from 2019. The log stopped at 11:17 in the evening on March 26th. There were no entries after that time, no system shutdown notice, no transition to a backup server. The data simply stopped. At first, Victor assumed the files were incomplete. He checked earlier years. 2018 ended the same way, 11/17, March 26th. So did 2017. And 2016. Victor expanded the search. Every available digital dispatch record from that town ended at 11:17 on March 26th, regardless of year. Police calls, fire calls, ambulance dispatches, internal radio logs, even automated system health checks all stopped at that minute. Earlier years used different software platforms, different vendors, and different hardware. Yet the ending point remained identical. Victor contacted the county office to request clarification. The clerk confirmed the town still operated its own dispatch center. Calls were handled locally and then mirrored to county systems when necessary. There had been no reported outages or closures. When Victor asked for records after 11:17, the clerk paused. She said those records were not accessible through normal requests and suggested he speak with the town administrator. Victor scheduled a visit. He arrived in town 2 days later. The dispatch center was housed inside the municipal building, a low concrete structure beside the police station. From the outside, everything appeared normal. Patrol cars were parked. Lights were on. People came and went. Inside, Victor met the town administrator, a man named Harold Metz. Harold was in his early 60s and had worked for the town for most of his career. When Victor explained his findings, Harold did not seem surprised. He said the issue had been noticed before. Harold explained that dispatch operations technically continued after 11:17, but records from that point forward were handled differently. When Victor asked what that meant, Harold hesitated, then said the logs were considered unreliable. Victor requested to see them anyway. Harold declined, stating the records were restricted under an internal policy enacted years earlier. He did not elaborate. Victor then asked a more specific question. He asked why the cutoff minute never changed. Harold did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked Victor how much he already knew. Victor explained that he only knew the data ended abruptly and uniformly. He had no theory beyond a possible automation error. Harold sighed and told Victor to follow him. They walked down a hallway into a small conference room. Inside was a metal filing cabinet with a faded label. Harold unlocked it and removed a single binder. He placed it on the table and opened it. Inside were printed dispatch summaries. They all ended at 11:17. Harold explained that years ago, before the town upgraded its systems, dispatchers noticed something odd. Every year, on March 26th, calls would continue to come in after 11:17, but the recordings and logs would not save properly. At first, they blamed equipment, then software, then human error, but the problem persisted through multiple upgrades. Harold said the town stopped attempting to preserve logs after that minute because reviewing them caused issues. Dispatchers reported audio distortion, missing segments, and entries that contradicted known events. Victor asked what kind of contradictions. Harold said there were calls logged that no one remembered taking. Units were dispatched that no one recalled sending. Responses were recorded for incidents that never appeared on police or medical reports. Victor requested audio samples. Harold shook his head and said those were not kept. Victor pressed further. He asked why the cutoff time was always 11:17. Harold told him that was when it started. The first incident occurred years earlier, long before Victor's review period. On March 26th of that year, at exactly 11:17, the dispatch center received a call that no one could explain. The call did not come from a phone number. It appeared as an internal line. The dispatcher who answered it reported hearing background noise consistent with the town square, even though the square was empty at that hour. Then a voice spoke, stating an address that did not exist. When the dispatcher attempted to clarify, the call ended. Minutes later, another call came in. this time requesting medical assistance for the same non-existent address. Then another, and another. Units were dispatched. They found nothing. After midnight, calls continued. Some referenced incidents from earlier in the day, some referenced people who were already accounted for, others referenced situations that had not yet occurred. By morning, the dispatch logs were incoherent. The town reviewed the records and decided not to forward them to the county. They archived them internally. The following year, the same thing happened. Same date, same minute. Victor asked how dispatchers handled it now. Harold explained that on March 26th, shifts were scheduled differently. Dispatchers were instructed to handle calls verbally and document only minimal summaries. After 11:17, recordings were disabled manually. Victor asked if calls still came in. Harold said yes. Victor asked if those calls were real emergencies. Harold said some were. Others were not. Victor requested to speak with the dispatcher. Harold arranged a meeting with a senior dispatcher named Elaine Foster. Elaine had worked the center for over 20 years. She confirmed Harold's account. Elaine said that at 11:17, the tone of calls changed. Background noise became inconsistent. Callers provided details that were technically accurate, but contextually wrong. She described calls reporting fires in buildings already burned years earlier, medical emergencies involving people who were sitting safely at home, reports of accidents that later occurred hours after the call was received. Victor asked why they continued to answer the phones. Elaine said because not answering them made things worse. In 1 year, they attempted to reroute calls to the county after 11:17. The county dispatch center received a flood of calls with incorrect routing data. Several calls originated from lines that did not exist. One county dispatcher reported hearing her own voice speaking back to her through the line. After that, the town resumed local handling. Victor asked if anyone had ever been harmed due to these anomalies. Elaine said no one could say for sure. She did say that several incidents reported during the 11:17 window later matched real events in altered forms, minor injuries instead of severe ones, property damage instead of loss of life, near misses instead of collisions. Victor reviewed physical logbooks from earlier decades. Even handwritten logs stopped at the same minute. Some pages contained marginal notes written later, short phrases like incomplete, unstable, do not copy. Victor requested to stay overnight on March 26th. Harold strongly advised against it. Victor insisted. The town allowed him to observe from the conference room without direct system access. At 11:16, the dispatch center was calm. At 11:17, the room changed. Victor could not describe it clearly later. He said the air felt heavier. The radios crackled more often, the phone lines lit up more frequently. He heard calls being answered. He heard addresses spoken that did not appear on any map. He heard a dispatcher repeat information slowly, as if trying to ground it. Victor checked his watch repeatedly. At 11:30, he noticed something else. The wall clock above the consoles had stopped. It read 11:17. All of them had. Victor left the next morning with limited notes. His official report cited data corruption and legacy system conflicts. Privately, he archived his findings. The dispatch logs from the town still end at 11:17. They always have. And according to those who work there, the calls never really stop. This lake returned a body that wasn't missing. According to county recovery records, a body was pulled from a lake belonging to a man who was confirmed alive at the time. In mid-June of 2020, a water quality inspector named Patrick Elrow drove to a remote reservoir to conduct routine sampling. Patrick was 51 years old and had worked for the Regional Environmental Authority for over 20 years. His job involved checking algae levels, measuring oxygen content, and inspecting shoreline runoff points. The work was solitary but predictable, and Patrick followed the same procedures at every site. The reservoir sat in a forested basin several miles from the nearest town. It was man-made, created decades earlier to support irrigation and flood control. Recreational access was limited. Swimming was discouraged, and boating required permits. Despite this, the lake was popular with anglers and hikers due to its quiet setting. Patrick arrived shortly before 9 in the morning. He parked near the maintenance dock, logged his arrival time using the handheld system, and began preparing his sampling equipment. Weather conditions were calm. The water surface was smooth, and visibility was good. At 9:42, Patrick completed his first shoreline sample. He uploaded the data successfully and moved toward the dock to collect a deeper water reading. That was when he noticed something near the far edge of the lake. At first, it appeared to be debris. Patrick raised his binoculars and focused. What he saw made him lower them immediately. A body was floating near the reeds. Patrick radioed for assistance and provided coordinates. He was instructed to remain where he was and avoid approaching the water. Local deputies and a water recovery team were dispatched. Within 40 minutes, responders arrived. The body was retrieved carefully and brought to shore. It belonged to a middle-aged man wearing jeans, boots, and a dark jacket. There was no visible trauma. No identification was found on him. The deputies documented the scene and began the standard missing person cross-check. One deputy read the name from the recovered fingerprints and paused. The name belonged to a local resident named Calvin Morrow. Calvin Morrow was not missing. In fact, Calvin Morrow was at work. Dispatch confirmed that Calvin had clocked in at a manufacturing plant across the county at 6 that morning. Supervisors at the plant verified he was currently on shift. A deputy was sent to confirm in person. While waiting, responders continued processing the scene. The body was estimated to have been in the water for less than 24 hours. Water temperature and skin conditions supported that assessment. The clothing on the body matched what Calvin was reportedly wearing the previous evening, according to his wife. She was contacted and confirmed the jacket and boots looked identical. At 10:37, the deputy at the plant called back. Calvin Morrow was standing in front of him. He was alive, coherent, and visibly shaken after being told why police were there. He insisted he had not been to the lake in months. He agreed to accompany the deputy to the station. The situation escalated quickly. The recovered body was transported to the county morgue. A second set of fingerprints was taken, dental records were compared, the match was confirmed again. The body was Calvin Morrow. At the same time, the living Calvin Morrow arrived at the station. He provided identification. Fingerprints were taken. They matched the body. Investigators assumed an administrative error. Samples were retaken. Another technician performed the comparison. The results did not change. Two identical biometric profiles existed simultaneously. Calvin was 48 years old and worked as a machine operator. He had lived in the county his entire life. He had no known medical conditions beyond controlled hypertension. He had no criminal record. When questioned, Calvin stated he had gone home after work the previous evening, eaten dinner, watched television, and gone to bed around 10. His wife confirmed his account. She said he left for work at 5:30 the next morning. Surveillance footage from their home showed Calvin entering at 6:12 in the evening and leaving at 5:28 the next morning. The footage was continuous and unbroken. Yet the body recovered from the lake showed signs consistent with having entered the water sometime after midnight. Investigators reviewed cell phone records. Calvin's phone showed normal usage until 9:48 the previous night. After that, there was no activity until 5:32 in the morning, when his alarm was dismissed. The phone was found in his pocket when he arrived at the station. The body in the lake had no phone. An autopsy was ordered. The medical examiner found no cause of death immediately apparent. There was water in the lungs, consistent with drowning, but no signs of struggle or injury. Toxicology results were clean. Time of death was estimated between 1 and 3 in the morning. The examiner noted something unusual. The body showed a surgical scar on the lower abdomen. The living Calvin did not have that scar. Medical records confirmed Calvin had never undergone surgery. Investigators searched hospital databases. They found a record-matching Calvin Morrow who had undergone an emergency appendectomy 12 years earlier in a neighboring state. That Calvin Morrow was listed as deceased. The record showed he died 2 days after the surgery due to complications. The social security number matched. The birth date matched. The parents' names matched. Investigators now faced two conflicting histories tied to the same identity. The living Calvin had no memory of any surgery. His wife confirmed he had no scar when they met 15 years earlier. Childhood photos showed no mark. The body from the lake clearly had one. Dental records were examined next. Both Calvins matched perfectly, including minor alignment quirks and fillings. The medical examiner noted that the dental work on the body appeared slightly older, based on material wear. The difference was subtle but measurable. As news of the situation spread internally, state authorities were notified. The case was classified as sensitive and access was restricted. Investigators reviewed employment records. The living Calvin had consistent work history for over 20 years. Tax filings were uninterrupted. There were no gaps. However, a deeper review showed that before 2008, records became inconsistent. Two overlapping employment histories appeared briefly in state databases, then resolved into one. No explanation was documented. Investigators returned to the lake. Sonar scans revealed nothing unusual beneath the surface. The shoreline showed no signs of recent activity. No footprints or vehicle tracks were found near the water overnight. The water quality logs revealed something else. At 1:14 in the morning, sensors recorded a sudden temperature fluctuation in a localized section near the reeds. It lasted less than 3 minutes, then normalized. No weather event explained it. The sensor had never recorded a similar spike before. A week later, while the investigation continued, the morgue reported another anomaly. The body's fingerprints had changed. Not dramatically, but enough that automated systems flagged the discrepancy. Manual comparison showed ridge patterns remained the same, but pressure distortion marks were different, as if the skin had shifted. The medical examiner ordered the body refrigerated again and restricted access. That night, security cameras in the morgue recorded a brief power fluctuation. For 8 seconds, the camera feed cut out. When it returned, the body was still present. Nothing else appeared altered. The living Calvin was placed under protective observation. He was not charged with any offense. He was instructed not to leave the county. Calvin reported increasing discomfort. He said he felt watched, especially near water. He reported waking at night with the sensation of holding his breath. Medical examinations found nothing physically wrong. On the 10th day after recovery, the body in the morgue began to decompose rapidly, far faster than expected under controlled conditions. Within hours, it was no longer viable for further testing. The medical examiner documented the change and ordered cremation, citing biohazard concerns. Authorization was granted by the county under emergency provisions. The ashes were sealed and stored. 2 days later, the lake level dropped unexpectedly by several inches. No release had been scheduled, no leak was found. At dawn the following morning, Patrick Elrow returned to the reservoir for follow-up sampling. Near the same reeds, something floated at the surface. It was a jacket. The jacket belonged to Calvin Morrow. The living Calvin was still alive, sitting in his home at that exact moment, drinking coffee under observation. After that day, the case was quietly closed. Official records list the recovered individual as an unidentified male with similarities to a local resident. The fingerprint match was removed from public databases. The appendectomy record was marked as clerical error. Calvin Morrow continued his life. He still works at the same plant. He avoids the lake. Patrick transferred departments. The reservoir remains open. But according to internal recovery logs, the lake did not produce a missing person. It returned someone who was never gone. The basement door that only opens after the final prayer. According to maintenance and clergy records, a locked basement door opened repeatedly only after a specific prayer was completed. In early December of 2018, a facilities caretaker named Owen Carth was assigned to oversee after-hours maintenance at a small hillside chapel outside a rural town. Owen was 53 years old and had worked custodial and repair jobs for religious properties most of his adult life. He was familiar with old buildings, aging infrastructure, and the odd sounds that came with them at night. The chapel was modest, built decades earlier by a local congregation that had since dwindled. Regular services were still held twice a week, mostly attended by elderly parishioners. The building included a sanctuary, a small office, storage rooms, and a basement that was officially listed as sealed and unused. Owen's duties were straightforward. He checked heating systems, ensured doors were locked, and addressed minor repairs reported by staff. He worked evenings to avoid disrupting services. On his first night at the chapel, nothing seemed out of place. The basement door was located at the back of the sanctuary, partially hidden behind a folding partition. It was a solid wooden door reinforced with a steel frame and secured by a keyed deadbolt. A sign above it read, "Authorized access only." Owen was told the basement contained outdated electrical systems and unstable flooring. He was also told not to open it. For the first 2 weeks, Owen worked without incident. He noted the usual creaks, the ticking of cooling pipes, and the occasional wind pressing against stained glass. He locked up each night by 10, armed the alarm, and left. The first anomaly occurred during an evening service. Owen stayed late to observe. The chapel hosted a small prayer meeting led by an elderly pastor named Harold Vance. Attendance was sparse, fewer than 15 people seated in the pews. Owen remained near the back, waiting to secure the building afterward. As the service ended, Pastor Vance led the congregation in a final prayer. His voice was steady and practiced. When the last words were spoken, a low sound echoed through the sanctuary. It sounded like a latch moving. Several attendees glanced around, confused. Owen felt the vibration through the floor beneath his boots. After the congregation left, Owen approached the source. The basement door was ajar. He was certain it had been locked earlier. He checked the deadbolt. It hung open, unlocked, without signs of tampering. Owen closed the door and locked it again, assuming human error. The next morning, he reported the incident to the chapel administrator, a woman named Marlene Schaff. Marlene said the door had done that before, but rarely. She blamed pressure changes from the heating system. Owen accepted the explanation, though it did not fully satisfy him. The second incident occurred 3 nights later. No service was scheduled that evening. Owen was alone in the building, replacing light fixtures in the office wing. At 9:45, the alarm panel registered a brief door sensor alert from the basement entrance. The alert cleared itself within seconds. Owen walked to the sanctuary. The basement door remained closed and locked. Confused, he checked the event log. The alert time corresponded exactly to 9:41. That time meant nothing to Owen until the following Sunday. That evening, another service was held. Different pastor, different congregation size, same final prayer. At 9:41, as the prayer ended, the basement door unlocked itself and opened several inches. This time, Owen watched it happen. He stood 10 feet away and saw the deadbolt retract smoothly without sound. The door eased open slowly, as if released by internal pressure. No one else noticed. Afterward, Owen inspected the lock mechanism. It showed no electrical components and no motorized parts. It was purely mechanical. The key hung on his belt the entire time. He documented the incident in his maintenance log. Over the next month, Owen noticed a pattern. The basement door never opened during services, sermons, hymns, or casual prayer. It only opened after the final prayer that closed the service. Not every time, but often enough to be undeniable. He began checking timestamps against service schedules. In every instance where the door unlocked, the time matched the exact moment the final prayer concluded. Owen brought this information to Marlene. She grew uncomfortable and admitted there was more history to the basement than she had disclosed. She explained that the chapel had once included a lower worship space used for private confession and night prayer. Years earlier, an incident occurred involving a small prayer group that met after hours. The details were vague, but the group was disbanded, and the basement was sealed. No records explained why. Owen asked to see the basement. Marlene refused. Curiosity overcame caution. One night, after a weekday prayer meeting, Owen waited near the sanctuary. Pastor Vance led the closing prayer as usual. When it ended, the basement door unlocked and opened wider than before. Owen waited until the chapel emptied. Then he descended the stairs. The basement was unfinished and colder than expected. Concrete walls absorbed sound. The air felt heavy and stale, like a room long closed but recently disturbed. His flashlight beam revealed old folding chairs, stacked hymnals, and a low altar built into the far wall. At the center of the room stood another door. This one was smaller and reinforced with metal brackets. There was no handle, only a recessed panel. Owen approached cautiously. The panel was warm to the touch. Behind him, the stairwell door closed on its own. Owen did not panic. He documented the layout, took photos, and returned upstairs without touching the inner door. When he reached the sanctuary, the basement door was closed and locked again. The next morning, Owen reviewed his photos. Several images were missing. The ones that remained showed faint impressions near the inner door, as if fingerprints pressed from the other side of the wall. Owen showed the photos to Marlene. She contacted the diocese. An internal review followed. Officials visited, inspected the basement, and sealed the inner door permanently. They replaced the basement lock and installed additional sensors. They told Owen the matter was resolved. It was not. The basement door continued to unlock after final prayers, even with the new hardware. Sensors recorded the deadbolt retracting without electrical input. Eventually, clergy changed the wording of the final prayer. The door did not open. For weeks, nothing happened. Then, one evening, Pastor Vance reverted to the traditional phrasing out of habit. The door opened immediately. The diocese ordered the chapel closed temporarily. Owen was reassigned. Before leaving, he was asked to sign a confidentiality agreement. He refused. Owen later learned the original prayer used to close services matched wording used in an older rite, one no longer practiced publicly. The rite was meant to mark the end of communal protection. The basement door remains sealed. The chapel reopened with revised liturgy. According to maintenance logs, no further openings have occurred. But Owen keeps copies of the sensor data. Every time the final prayer was spoken in full, the door responded. As if something below understood it was being dismissed, and waited for permission to move again. This emergency call was answered by someone who died years ago. According to county communications records, an emergency call was answered by a dispatcher who was officially deceased at the time. In late January of 2021, a systems auditor named Malcolm Iyer was assigned to review irregular call routing issues in a regional emergency dispatch network. Malcolm was 52 years old and had spent most of his career evaluating public safety infrastructure, focusing on redundancy failures and audio routing anomalies. His work was usually technical and detached, rarely involving people directly. The issue that triggered the review appeared minor at first. A single emergency call, placed from a rural township, showed an unusual routing marker. The call had been answered promptly, logged correctly, and resolved without escalation. The problem was not the response, but the responder. The dispatcher ID attached to the call belonged to a woman named Ruth Calder. Ruth Calder had died 9 years earlier. Malcolm initially assumed the ID had been reused improperly. That happened occasionally when old accounts were not fully purged from legacy systems. He checked the personnel database. Ruth Calder was listed as retired in 2011, deceased in 2012. Cause of death was listed as a stroke. Her employee badge had been deactivated, her credentials had been revoked. Her workstation had been reassigned. Yet the call record showed her dispatcher ID, voice authentication token, and login signature all active for a 6-minute window on January 22, 2021. Malcolm pulled the audio file. The call had been placed at 2:47 in the morning by a resident reporting a vehicle stalled on an icy road. The caller sounded calm, slightly confused, but not distressed. The dispatcher answered immediately. "County emergency. What's your location?" the voice said. Malcolm paused the playback. He had listened to hundreds of dispatcher recordings over the years. He knew the cadence, the pacing, the tone. This voice was older, steady, precise. He checked the archived training recordings. The voice on the call matched Ruth Calder. It was not approximate. It was exact. Ruth had been known for her clarity and deliberate phrasing. She spoke slowly, avoided filler words, and repeated critical information verbatim. Every one of those habits appeared in the recording. Malcolm listened through the entire call. Ruth guided the caller through basic safety steps, asked appropriate follow-up questions, and dispatched a patrol unit. The call ended normally. There were no glitches, no distortion, no overlapping audio. The patrol unit arrived 12 minutes later and assisted the driver. The officer filed a routine report. No one noted anything unusual. Malcolm checked the shift roster. At 2:47, the dispatch center had 3 active dispatchers. None of them were logged into Ruth's old console. All 3 denied handling the call. Their biometric logins confirmed they had not. Malcolm requested access to the dispatch floor security footage. The footage showed the room at the time of the call. 3 dispatchers sat at their stations. No one occupied Ruth's former desk, which had been removed years earlier. No one appeared to react to the call being answered elsewhere. The audio routing log showed the call had been handled internally, not forwarded, not replayed, not automated. Malcolm escalated the issue to the county communications director. The director authorized a deeper audit but instructed Malcolm not to share the finding widely. Malcolm began searching older records. He found another call. Then, another. Over the past 4 years, there were 7 emergency calls answered by Ruth Calder. All occurred between 2:30 and 3:10 in the morning. All were routine assistance calls. Vehicle issues, welfare checks, 1 medical call involving chest pain. In each case, responders arrived successfully. None of the callers reported anything unusual. Malcolm contacted one of them, a man whose call had occurred 2 years earlier. The man recalled speaking to a calm older woman who sounded like she knew exactly what she was doing. He assumed she was just a dispatcher. Malcolm asked if she had identified herself by name. The man said yes. She said, "This is Ruth, stay with me." That phrase appeared in the audio logs. Malcolm reviewed Ruth Calder's employment history. She had worked dispatch for 26 years. She was respected, methodical, and known for covering overnight shifts during staffing shortages. Coworkers described her as someone who never left a call unfinished. Ruth suffered a fatal stroke at home after retiring. She had not died on duty. Her workstation had been dismantled within weeks. Malcolm examined the technical side. Ruth's dispatcher ID should not have been able to authenticate without biometric input. The system required voice pattern matching and physical console access. Yet the logs showed both had occurred. Malcolm requested a test. With permission, he scheduled a controlled audit during the early morning window. He arranged for a test call to be placed from a secure line at 2:47. At exactly 2:47, the test phone rang. It was answered immediately. "County emergency. What's your location?" the voice said. Malcolm listened from the monitoring room. It was Ruth. The test call was terminated immediately. No dispatch occurred. System logs showed Ruth's ID active for 8 seconds. No console logged the interaction. Malcolm reviewed the security footage. At 2:47, one dispatcher looked up briefly as if hearing something faint through a headset, then returned to her screen. No one else reacted. Malcolm requested the audio file from the test call. It existed. The voice was calm, familiar. Malcolm asked the communications director for permission to interview former staff who had worked with Ruth. One retired dispatcher, a man named Joel Heron, agreed to speak. Joel said something that unsettled Malcolm. He said that after Ruth died, some overnight dispatchers reported hearing her voice faintly through inactive headsets. Short phrases, corrections, reminders. They dismissed it as fatigue. One dispatcher quit after claiming Ruth had answered a call before he could. The incident was never documented. Malcolm reviewed maintenance logs. He found that during the exact minutes when Ruth's calls occurred, the system recorded brief synchronization events. Not errors, not failures. Just alignments where timestamps across servers corrected themselves to match a single reference. That reference was an old backup server retired the year Ruth left. The server had been decommissioned, but not physically destroyed. It sat powered down in storage. Malcolm requested access to the storage facility. When technicians powered the server briefly for inspection, the system log showed one active process. It was a call handling module. The module was named after its creator, R. Calder. The module had been written years earlier as a patch to handle overflow calls during understaffed nights. It used archived audio prompts and decision trees based on Ruth's call handling patterns. It was not designed to answer calls independently, but over time, updates had layered over it. Malcolm realized the module had begun activating during low-traffic windows, answering calls before human dispatchers could. It used Ruth's recorded voice, but that explanation did not satisfy all the data. The module should not have been able to authenticate as Ruth. It should not have been able to adapt responses to new situations. It should not have known details not present in scripts. One call from 2020 involved a diabetic emergency. Ruth's voice instructed the caller to check a medication the caller had not mentioned. The instruction was correct. Malcolm asked the communications director to disable the module permanently. The director agreed. The server was wiped. The module was deleted. The following month, another call came in at 2:52. It was answered. "Stay with me," the voice said. This time, the caller hung up. The call log recorded no dispatcher ID. No audio file was saved. The patrol unit arrived anyway, responding to a silent dispatch ping. Malcolm resigned shortly after. In his final report, he cited unresolved legacy system behavior. Privately, he kept copies of the audio files. They remained the only records of emergency calls calmly answered by someone who had been dead for nearly a decade. Calls that were handled correctly. Calls that helped people. Calls answered by someone who, according to every official record, should not have been there at all. The security tape from this bridge is missing one person. According to Transportation Authority records, a security camera recorded a group crossing a bridge, but one confirmed individual never appeared on the footage. In late September of 2019, a structural safety inspector named Darren Holt was assigned to review pedestrian traffic footage from a concrete suspension bridge spanning a narrow river gorge. Darren was 47 years old and worked for a private firm contracted to assess wear patterns, crowd flow, and safety compliance on aging infrastructure. His job usually involved spreadsheets, timestamps, and long hours watching uneventful video. The bridge itself was unremarkable. It connected a small residential district to a public park and was used daily by joggers, cyclists, and families. There were no tolls, no checkpoints, and no access restrictions. The camera system had been installed 5 years earlier after minor vandalism incidents, and it recorded continuously from dusk until dawn. Darren's review focused on an incident reported by local police. A group of 5 people had crossed the bridge together late one evening. 4 were later seen on the far side. 1 was not. That person was not reported missing at the time. The group consisted of co-workers from a nearby distribution center who had finished a late shift and decided to walk together toward the bus stop near the park. Their names were logged during a routine police interview days later after questions arose about a discrepancy in head count reported by witnesses. All 5 co-workers agreed on one fact. They had crossed the bridge together. The missing individual was a man named Eric Voss. Eric was 32 years old and worked inventory control. He was described by co-workers as quiet, punctual, and uneventful. He had no known medical conditions and no history of erratic behavior. On the night in question, the group left work just after 10:30. Surveillance footage from the distribution center parking lot showed all 5 walking toward the street. Street cameras captured them approaching the bridge entrance together at 10:42. That was where the discrepancy began. Darren pulled the bridge footage from that night and slowed it down. The camera angle covered the entire span from end to end. The timestamp was stable. The image quality was clear. At 10:43, 4 people entered the frame. They walked side by side, talking casually, moving at a normal pace. There was no 5th person. Darren checked the previous frame. At 10:42 and 58 seconds, the same 4 entered view. No one else appeared before or after them for the next 3 minutes. Darren assumed a simple explanation. Perhaps Eric had stopped briefly before the bridge, fallen behind, or taken a different route. He checked street cameras on both sides. Footage showed all five approaching the bridge entrance together. Eric was clearly visible, walking slightly behind the others, adjusting his jacket. No camera showed him leaving the group. There was no footage of him turning back, stopping, or entering the park instead. Yet on the bridge camera, he did not exist. Darren reported the inconsistency to the Transportation Authority, assuming a dropped frame or encoding error. Engineers reviewed the footage and found no gaps, no corruption, and no missing data. The frames where Eric should have appeared were intact. He simply was not there. Police re-interviewed the four co-workers. Each independently stated Eric was with them on the bridge. One recalled Eric joking about the height. Another remembered Eric stopping briefly near the center to look over the railing. That detail troubled investigators. The bridge camera angle showed the center clearly. No one stopped. No one leaned over the railing. At 10:45, the four exited the far side and continued toward the bus stop. Street cameras confirmed their arrival. Eric did not appear. At 10:47, Eric's phone connected briefly to a cell tower near the bridge. The connection lasted 12 seconds, then dropped. No calls or messages were sent. The phone was never recovered. At the time, Eric was not reported missing because his roommates assumed he had stayed with friends. His employer assumed he took a personal day. It was not until 3 days later that concern was raised. By then, the bridge footage had already been reviewed for unrelated reasons, and the discrepancy was noticed by chance. A search of the river gorge was conducted. The water was shallow and slow-moving. No body was found, no clothing, no personal items. The bridge showed no signs of damage or disturbance. No reports of accidents or falls were logged that night. Darren continued reviewing footage from other nights. He discovered something unsettling. Over the previous 2 years, there were 3 other instances where bridge footage showed groups crossing with fewer people than were later confirmed present. In one case, a cyclist riding with 2 friends appeared alone on the bridge camera. In another, a couple walking with a child appeared as only 2 figures. In all cases, the missing individual later reappeared elsewhere, alive, confused, and unable to explain the gap. Eric did not reappear. Darren compared timestamps across cameras. In every case, the disappearance occurred within the first 10 seconds of entering the bridge frame. There were no lighting changes, no compression artifacts, no occlusions. The camera simply did not render the person. Engineers tested the system extensively. They walked across the bridge in groups, changing formations, speeds, and clothing. All test subjects appeared normally. They even replicated Eric's clothing using similar jackets and colors. Nothing reproduced the effect. Police requested Eric's phone records. His last outgoing message was sent at 10:39, joking about missing the bus. The message was delivered successfully. After 10:47, there was no activity. Investigators reviewed Eric's medical records. Nothing unusual. They reviewed his employment records. Nothing unusual. They reviewed his social media. No distress signals. One detail emerged during interviews. Eric had once worked temporary night security at the bridge site years earlier, during a brief construction project. His badge logs confirmed he had spent several overnight shifts walking the span repeatedly. He had complained once about the lighting making people disappear for a second when viewed from certain angles. At the time, it was dismissed as fatigue. Darren examined the camera calibration records. During Eric's security assignment years earlier, the camera had undergone a firmware update. The update adjusted motion detection thresholds and contrast processing. The update was later rolled back after causing false alerts. However, the bridge camera retained a modified profile. It was subtle and undocumented. Engineers could not explain how that profile would remove a person entirely. As the investigation stalled, Darren requested raw sensor data rather than processed video. This data was rarely accessed and stored separately. In the raw feed, Darren noticed something disturbing. At 10:43, 5 heat signatures entered the bridge. The thermal overlay clearly showed 5 bodies. At the center of the bridge, one heat signature faded abruptly. Not dropped. Not moved. Faded? The remaining four continued across. The fade occurred over less than half a second. No alarm was triggered. The thermal system logged no fault. The signature simply ceased to register. The coordinates of the fade matched the spot where one coworker remembered Eric stopping. Police expanded the search again. Nothing was found. Eric was officially listed as missing 6 weeks later. The bridge remained open. The camera remained active. Darren filed his final report, noting an unexplained discrepancy between optical and thermal data. The authority archived the report and took no action. Months later, Darren received an email from one of Eric's coworkers. The coworker said something strange had happened. While crossing the bridge alone one night, he heard someone behind him say his name. He turned. No one was there. The bridge camera footage from that night showed him crossing alone. No anomalies. Eric Voss was never found. The security tape still exists. It shows 4 people crossing a bridge, but every record agrees there should have been 5. And one of them is missing, not just from the footage, but from the place where he should have been seen at all. This closed hospital wing still broadcasts calls at night. The history of the St. Jude Medical Facility was defined by a series of strange mechanical failures that no technician could ever fully explain. For nearly 20 years, the east wing of the building had been completely sealed off from the public after a massive structural leak. Silas Vance worked as the lead maintenance supervisor for the entire campus, and he was responsible for the graveyard shift monitoring the security consoles. Silas was 52 years old and had spent most of his adult life fixated on the complex wiring of old industrial buildings. His goal for the night was simply to complete a routine inspection of the active power grids before the morning shift arrived. Everything seemed quiet until a single red light began to blink on the ancient switchboard located in the basement of the facility. This light indicated that an internal telephone line from the abandoned East Wing was suddenly drawing power and trying to connect. Silas knew that the phone lines in that specific section had been physically cut more than a decade ago during the renovation. He watched the light pulse in a rhythmic pattern that matched the steady beat of a human heart while the room stayed silent. The supervisor decided to investigate the signal because he feared a short circuit might cause a fire in the drywood framing. Silas grabbed his heavy tool bag and a powerful flashlight before heading toward the rusted metal doors that separated the 2 wings. He pushed through the heavy barrier and immediately noticed that the air inside the abandoned section felt significantly colder than the hallway. According to maintenance logs from 1994, this part of the building once housed the pediatric recovery ward and the records office. Dust covered every surface in thick gray layers, and the only sound was the crunch of broken glass under his heavy work boots. Silas reached the nurses' station where the primary hub for the internal communication system was once located, and he stopped to listen. A faint scratching sound echoed through the hallway, like someone was dragging a fingernail across the surface of a metal desk nearby. He turned his flashlight toward the sound and saw an old rotary telephone sitting on a plastic chair in the middle of the corridor. The cord for the phone was missing, yet the internal bell inside the plastic housing began to ring with a sharp metallic tone. Silas picked up the receiver with a shaking hand and held it to his ear while he held his breath to listen. He heard a series of rapid clicks, followed by the muffled sound of a woman speaking in a very hurried and frantic voice. The woman reportedly identified herself as a night nurse named Meredith, and she asked why the patient in room 412 was missing. Records from the hospital archive later showed that a nurse named Meredith worked in this wing during the summer of 1982. Silas tried to respond, but the line only emitted a high-pitched static that made his ears ring with a sharp pain. He dropped the receiver and watched as it swung back and forth on its short cord while the voice continued to speak. The woman on the line started reciting a list of names and dates that sounded like a series of official hospital discharge logs. Silas realized that the dates she mentioned were all from the same week in October of 1986, which was very strange. This was the exact week that a massive storm had caused the initial structural damage that led to the wing being closed. He pulled out his digital camera to document the phone, but the screen remained black, despite having a full battery earlier that night. The maintenance supervisor moved further down the hallway to find room 412 so he could see if anything was left inside. He found the door was jammed shut with a piece of heavy equipment, and it took him several minutes to pry it open. Inside the room, he found a single metal bed frame and a stack of yellowed papers scattered across the cracked linoleum floor. One of the papers was a handwritten note from a doctor stating that the patient in this room required constant cardiac monitoring. The note was dated October 14th, 1986, which was the night the East Wing was officially evacuated during the heavy flooding. Silas looked at the wall and saw a set of copper wires hanging from a hole where a monitoring device had once been. He noticed that the copper wires were glowing with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse in time with the static. The sound of the woman's voice suddenly blasted through the building intercom system, and her tone had changed from frantic to very calm. She began to describe the exact outfit that Silas was wearing, including the color of his jacket and the brand of his boots. Silas felt a surge of adrenaline, and he began to back out of the room while keeping his flashlight pointed at the ceiling. He reached the main hallway and saw that all the lights in the abandoned wing were now glowing with a dim orange hue. The intercom system continued to broadcast the voice of the nurse as she described a man standing alone in the dark hallway. Silas realized that the woman was not just a recording, but she was describing his movements in real time as he walked. He ran toward the exit doors, but found that the heavy electronic locks had been engaged from the main security console downstairs. This was impossible because Silas was the only person with the security codes required to lock down the abandoned wing for the night. He pulled out his radio to call the front desk, but the only thing he heard was the sound of his own breathing. The voice on the intercom told him to look behind the desk at the nurse's station if he wanted to find the key. Silas walked back to the station and reached into a small hidden compartment where he found a set of very old brass keys. The keys were labeled with the name of the head administrator who had disappeared shortly after the wing was sealed in the 80s. Silas used the largest key to unlock the emergency exit, and he practically fell out into the cool night air of the courtyard. He looked back at the windows of the East Wing and saw a single light shining from the window of room 412. The local police department later conducted a full sweep of the building, but they found no evidence of any living person inside. They discovered that the telephone Silas had answered was a prop that had never been connected to any functional electrical system or line. Investigators found a series of dispatch logs from 1986 that contained the exact same phrases Silas heard on the intercom. The logs were part of a training exercise that had been recorded, but the playback equipment had been destroyed in the flood. Silas Vance resigned from his position the very next day, and he never returned to the St. Jude Medical Facility for work. The hospital board eventually decided to demolish the East Wing entirely to make room for a new parking structure and modern lab. During the demolition, the construction crew found a hidden room behind the walls of the recovery ward that contained several active microphones. These microphones were connected to a series of hidden speakers that were designed to broadcast audio into the closed wing for testing. However, the power source for these speakers had been disconnected for 30 years, and the wires were completely corroded by the damp. The mystery of how the calls were broadcasted remains a subject of debate among the former staff members who still remember that night. Silas still tells people that he can hear the faint sound of a ringing phone whenever he passes by the empty lot. He believes that some buildings have a way of holding on to the sounds of the past like a needle on a record. This event serves as a reminder that the technology we leave behind can sometimes find a way to speak back to us. The voicemail found after the hiker was already gone. According to archived dispatch records, a voicemail was logged at the ranger office after the missing hiker was already believed unreachable. In late October of 2012, a seasonal trail technician named Rowan Hale arrived at a remote high-desert forest reserve just after sunrise. Rowan was 34 years old and worked short-term contracts, maintaining trails, signage, and emergency access routes. His assignment that day was routine and clearly documented. He was scheduled to hike a closed maintenance loop, replace two damaged markers, photograph erosion zones, then return to his vehicle before nightfall. The reserve covered thousands of acres of broken terrain, with narrow canyons, dry washes, and long ridgelines that interfered with radio signals. Cell service was unreliable and often non-existent beyond the access road. Rowan had worked this reserve twice before and understood the risks. He parked at a locked service gate, signed the trail register with time and destination, and started hiking shortly after 10 that morning. Weather conditions were considered ideal for late October. The sky was clear, winds were light, and no storms were forecast. Temperatures were expected to drop quickly after sunset, but daytime conditions posed no immediate concern. Rowan carried standard gear, including water, a first aid kit, a handheld radio, spare batteries, and a compact camera issued by the reserve. At 1:40 in the afternoon, Rowan missed his first scheduled radio check. That alone did not raise alarms, since terrain often blocked transmission windows. When the second check was missed at 3:40, a supervisor noted the delay in the daily log. By 5:30, with daylight fading, Rowan had still not returned and his truck remained parked at the gate. The situation was upgraded to overdue status, but protocol required waiting until morning unless there was evidence of distress. No emergency transmission had been received, and weather conditions overnight were stable. Search operations were scheduled to begin at first light the following day. Search teams deployed just after sunrise, with 3 rangers and 1 volunteer tracker familiar with the terrain. They followed Rowan's planned loop using the trail register, his work order, and known maintenance points. Boot prints and tool marks confirmed Rowan had replaced the first damaged marker successfully. Photographs on his work camera showed normal progress through early afternoon. The final image on the camera was timestamped at 3:16. It showed a narrow ravine bordered by stone walls and scrub brush. Nothing in the frame suggested danger or urgency. No image after that time was recovered. The camera battery still held a charge when it was later found. Shortly before noon, searchers located Rowan's backpack near a dry wash, roughly 1 mile off the established trail. It was upright, leaned carefully against a rock, not discarded or damaged. Inside were his water bottle, first aid kit, camera, radio, and spare batteries. Nothing appeared broken or disturbed. The radio was powered on, set to the reserve frequency, but emitted no sound. There were no obvious signs of a fall, no blood, and no clear tracks leading away from the site. Wind and loose soil made tracking difficult, but the placement of the pack appeared intentional. Search leaders marked the location and expanded the search radius outward through the canyon system. That evening, after search teams had returned to base, the reserve office phone rang once and stopped. The office was closed, so the system recorded the call automatically. The caller ID showed a blocked number. No one noticed the voicemail at the time, as staff were focused on planning the next day's search. The following morning, a dispatcher reviewing overnight activity discovered the message. It was 43 seconds long. The recording began with heavy breathing, followed by Rowan's voice. He identified himself by name and job title, consistent with emergency training. His speech was strained but coherent. He said he was injured, off-trail, and unable to reach his radio. Midway through the message, Rowan paused and lowered his voice. He said he could hear someone nearby, though he did not specify who. The background audio contained wind and faint movement sounds. Near the end of the recording, a sharp impact noise was heard, followed by silence until the call ended. Dispatch logs showed the voicemail timestamp as October 29, 2012 at 7:12 in the evening. That time was nearly 10 hours after Rowan's last confirmed activity on his camera. It was also well after sunset, when temperatures in the canyon dropped rapidly. Search teams had already cleared the area surrounding the dry wash earlier that afternoon. Rangers replayed the voicemail repeatedly, attempting to identify background noises. Audio technicians later noted a low, irregular tapping sound beneath the wind. It did not match footsteps or known wildlife movement patterns. No additional voices were detected. The sharp noise at the end of the message could not be conclusively identified. The discovery of the voicemail shifted the search strategy. Teams focused on areas where a landline phone might exist, though none were marked on current maps. Over the next 3 days, aerial searches, canine units, and ground teams combed the reserve. No additional items belonging to Rowan were located. No tracks indicated movement toward roads or exits. Weather records confirmed conditions remained stable throughout the search window. There were no flash floods, landslides, or temperature extremes that could explain a sudden disappearance. After 72 hours with no progress, the search was scaled back. Rowan Hale was officially listed as missing and presumed deceased. Several months later, during a routine audit of communication systems, investigators reviewed the voicemail metadata more closely. The call did not originate from a cellular network. Instead, it was traced to a landline tied to an emergency call box registered within the reserve. That call box was located along a decommissioned service road several miles from where Rowan's backpack was found. Records showed the call box had been taken out of service over 10 years earlier. It was no longer listed on public maps and was believed to be unpowered. Technicians were dispatched to inspect the site. They found the box intact, locked, and unexpectedly active. The internal line was live and connected directly to the reserve office exchange. There were no signs of forced entry. The handset showed no usable fingerprints, despite controlled handling procedures. Soil analysis around the box showed no clear footprints or tire tracks dating to the night of the call. The service road leading to it was rough and rarely used, making recent access difficult to conceal. The distance between the backpack site and the call box was calculated at just over 7 miles across steep, uneven terrain. Based on elevation changes and known routes, the hike would have taken several hours under ideal conditions. Rowan's voicemail suggested injury and limited mobility. No evidence supported the idea that he could have reached the call box before nightfall. Investigators considered whether someone else could have placed the call. However, no witnesses reported vehicles or hikers in the area that evening. Archived gate logs showed no entries or exits after Rowan's arrival. The reserve was closed to the public that day due to seasonal restrictions. Another anomaly emerged from radio records. At 6:58 that evening, a brief transmission was logged on the reserve frequency. It lasted 2 seconds and contained only static mixed with a faint human exhale. No radio identification signal was attached. All search personnel were accounted for and reported no transmissions at that time. The phone system provider confirmed the voicemail was recorded in real time. There was no delay, buffering, or forwarding issue documented. The landline connected directly to the reserve exchange without passing through cellular infrastructure. The timestamp was considered reliable. After months of review, the investigation concluded with no explanation that fit all known facts. Rowan Hale's disappearance remained unresolved. The voicemail was classified as an unexplained communication event linked to a missing person case. The emergency call box was permanently disabled and later removed from internal maps. Years later, the case is still mentioned during ranger training sessions, usually in quieter tones. The voicemail remains archived with its original timestamp and source information. It stands as the only confirmed message from someone who, according to all physical evidence, was already gone. This forest ranger station logged a shift that never happened. According to internal timekeeping records, a full overnight shift was logged at a ranger station that had been locked and empty. In mid-November of 2014, a temporary forest protection officer named Calder Wynn was assigned to a small ranger station deep inside a protected woodland corridor. Calder was 39 years old and had worked rotating contracts, monitoring access roads, checking wildlife cameras, and responding to after-hours alarms. The station was remote, operating with minimal staff and closed to the public during winter months. That week, Calder's role was straightforward. He was scheduled to cover daytime patrols only, documenting fence damage, and updating camera batteries before seasonal closure. Overnight staffing had been suspended weeks earlier due to budget limits. The station was locked every evening at 6, with alarms armed and logs finalized by the last departing ranger. On Tuesday, November 18th, Calder arrived just before 8 in the morning. He unlocked the station, disarmed the alarm, and began his routine checks. Inside, everything appeared normal at first. The lights were off, the heater was cold, and the logbook sat open on the front desk where it had been left the previous afternoon. While reviewing the logbook, Calder noticed something that stopped him. The overnight shift section for the previous night was filled out. A name was signed, arrival and departure times were entered, and routine notes had been written neatly in blue ink. The shift spanned from 6:30 in the evening until 6:15 the next morning. There was only one problem. No overnight shift had been scheduled, and no ranger was assigned to work it. The signature did not belong to any current staff member. It was unfamiliar, but written confidently, without hesitation marks. The notes described uneventful conditions, including temperature checks, generator status, and perimeter walks completed at regular intervals. Each entry matched the format used by trained staff. Calder checked the security panel. The alarm history showed the system had been disarmed at 6:28 the previous evening and rearmed at 6:17 that morning. Those times aligned almost exactly with the logged shift. There were no error codes or forced entry alerts. Assuming a clerical mistake, Calder contacted the regional office by radio. Supervisors confirmed no one had been scheduled overnight, and no authorization had been issued for station access. Maintenance staff also confirmed no work orders required entry during that time. Calder conducted a walkthrough of the station. The kitchen showed signs of use. A coffee mug sat in the sink, still faintly warm. The trash bin contained a used paper towel. The restroom showed fresh water droplets in the sink basin. None of this had been present when the station was locked the prior afternoon. The station's exterior told a similar story. Boot prints circled the building in the frost, forming a consistent patrol path. The prints were clear and evenly spaced, suggesting calm walking rather than hurried movement. Calder followed them until they faded near the tree line. Security camera footage was reviewed next. Cameras covered the front entrance, the equipment shed, and the access road. From 6:30 onward, footage showed normal nighttime conditions. No vehicles arrived, no figures appeared, doors were not visibly opened, yet interior sensors recorded movement throughout the building at regular intervals. The generator log showed it had been checked twice overnight, with readings entered digitally at times matching the handwritten notes. Power consumption records confirmed usage consistent with one person moving through the station, using lights intermittently, and running water briefly. By midday, supervisors arrived to inspect the station themselves. They confirmed the log entries were accurate in form and terminology. The language used matched internal phrasing taught during ranger training. Some abbreviations were outdated, no longer used in current manuals, but still technically correct. One detail stood out. In the remarks section at 4:42 in the morning, the writer noted hearing movement near the eastern tree line, but observing nothing upon inspection. That phrasing matched a report filed 8 years earlier by a ranger who later transferred. The wording was nearly identical. Investigators compared the signature to archived personnel files. It closely resembled the handwriting of a former ranger named Lowell Grain, who had worked the station a decade earlier. Lowell had resigned after an injury and later passed away from illness several years before the incident. The idea was dismissed as coincidence. Handwriting similarities could be misleading, and there was no evidence linking Lowell to the station after his departure. Still, the match unsettled those reviewing the records. Further, anomalies emerged during a deeper systems audit. The keycard used to access the station overnight had been registered to a master credential deactivated years earlier. It should not have functioned. Yet access logs showed it had been used correctly without triggering alerts. At 6:51 that morning, a radio transmission had been logged automatically by the base repeater. It lasted 3 seconds and contained only a single spoken word. The word was indistinct, but analysts believed it was a call sign once assigned to the station, retired after restructuring. No one present at the station that day claimed to have made the transmission. Weather data added another layer of confusion. Temperatures dropped below freezing overnight, yet no condensation or frost patterns inside the station indicated prolonged door openings. Whoever had been inside appeared to move efficiently, closing doors promptly and maintaining internal conditions. By the end of the week, the incident was documented as an unexplained access event. The logbook page was removed and archived. The station's locks were replaced, the alarm system upgraded, and overnight access protocols revised. Despite these changes, no further incidents occurred. No unauthorized access was recorded again. The station remained quiet through the winter season. Years later, during training sessions, instructors occasionally reference the case without naming it directly. They describe it as an example of why logs matter and why systems should never be assumed infallible. The overnight shift remains recorded in the archives, complete with times, notes, and a signature that matches no living staff member. It stands as a documented account of work performed by someone who, according to every schedule and roster, was never there. The photo taken in this motel room shouldn't exist. According to police inventory records, a photograph was logged from a motel room that had been sealed, powered down, and officially unoccupied. In early March of 2015, a regional insurance adjuster named Vaughn Mercer checked into a small roadside motel along a two-lane highway that cut through farmland and scrub forest. Vaughn was 41 years old and had worked in property claims for nearly 2 decades. His job required constant travel, long drives, and overnight stays in places chosen for convenience rather than comfort. The motel sat several miles outside the nearest town. It catered mostly to truck drivers and seasonal workers, but business had declined sharply. One entire wing was closed for renovations that never fully began. The remaining rooms stayed open, though rarely more than 2 were occupied on a given night. Vaughn arrived just after 8 in the evening. The front desk clerk, a woman in her late 50s, explained that most guests preferred rooms closer to the office, but those were unavailable due to plumbing work. She assigned Vaughn a room at the far end of the ground floor. She hesitated briefly before handing him the key, then added that the room had been cleared earlier that afternoon. Vaughn signed the register, paid in advance, and parked directly outside his door. Security cameras later confirmed his arrival time at 8:12. He carried a single overnight bag, a laptop case, and a folder containing claim documents. No one else arrived or departed in the following hour. The room itself was basic and outdated. The carpet was threadbare, the curtains thin, and the air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals. Vaughn set his bag on the chair, turned on the television at low volume, and plugged in his phone to charge. He reviewed emails and entered notes from inspections he had completed earlier that day. At 9:14, Vaughn sent a text message to a coworker confirming his location and expected departure time the next morning. The message was delivered successfully. After that, his phone showed no outgoing calls, texts, or data usage. Sometime during the night, Vaughn disappeared. When he failed to arrive at his next appointment by 10 the following morning, his employer attempted to reach him. Calls went unanswered. By noon, the motel manager was contacted and asked to check the room. The manager unlocked the door with a master key, while a local deputy observed. The room appeared undisturbed. The bed was neatly made, the television was off, and Vaughn's overnight bag sat unopened near the chair. His jacket hung carefully over the backrest. His wallet, keys, and watch were placed in a straight line on the nightstand. Vaughn's phone was found face down near the center of the room. It was powered off. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken objects, and no evidence of forced entry. The bathroom sink was dry, and the shower showed no signs of recent use. Security footage from the motel showed Vaughn entering his room at 8:16. No footage showed him leaving. The hallway camera covering his door recorded no activity from 9:20 onward. No other guests or staff members were seen approaching that section of the building overnight. A missing person report was filed that evening. During evidence processing, Vaughn's phone was powered on at the police station. The battery level was at 31%, consistent with being unplugged sometime during the night. There were no missed calls, emergency alerts, or drafts. While reviewing the phone's photo gallery, an officer noticed a single image that did not fit the timeline. The photograph was timestamped at 11:58 that night. It showed Vaughn standing inside the motel room near the foot of the bed, facing the camera. Vaughn's expression was neutral. His eyes were open and focused slightly above the lens, as if looking at something just beyond the phone. His arms hung loosely at his sides. There was no visible blur, suggesting he was standing still. The image was well composed. Based on the angle, the phone appeared to have been placed on the dresser across the room. The photograph had been taken using the rear camera. There was no reflection in the mirror showing another person. The most immediate concern involved the lighting. The room was fully illuminated by the overhead light, casting even shadows across the walls and floor. However, motel maintenance records showed that the overhead fixture in that room had been disconnected weeks earlier. The motel manager confirmed this detail. That room had been part of the renovation wing and had only recently been reopened due to demand. While basic cleaning had been completed, electrical repairs were still pending. The overhead light switch did nothing when tested earlier that evening. Maintenance logs supported the claim. Power to that specific circuit had been shut off since mid-January. There were no records indicating it had been restored. Investigators questioned whether the photograph could have been taken earlier, then misdated. Digital forensics specialists examined the file metadata. The timestamp matched the phone's internal clock, which was accurate and synced to network time earlier that day. There were no signs of editing, manipulation, or file corruption. Compression patterns matched other images Vaughn had taken during inspections the previous week. The photograph appeared to be a single original capture. Another detail raised concern. In the background of the image, the bathroom doorway was visible. A shadow extended across the bathroom wall at an angle that did not match Vaughn's position or the known layout of the room. There was no lamp or external light source capable of producing it. Investigators returned to the motel to recreate the photograph. Using the same phone model and camera settings, they attempted to produce similar lighting conditions. Without the overhead light, the room remained dim even with curtains open during daylight. No configuration matched the image. While examining the room again, an officer noticed something partially concealed behind the dresser. A narrow door was set into the wall, its frame painted the same color as the room. The door led to an adjoining room. The adjoining room had been sealed for years due to structural damage. Its windows were boarded from the outside, and the floor sloped noticeably toward the center. There was no electricity, no furniture, and no active utilities. Dust patterns inside the adjoining room suggested it had not been entered recently. However, the lock mechanism on the connecting door showed fresh scuff marks, as if it had been opened and closed multiple times. No fingerprints suitable for identification were recovered from the handle. Further investigation into motel records revealed that the adjoining room had been removed from service following an incident over a decade earlier. An overnight guest had been found unresponsive and pronounced dead at the scene. The death was ruled a medical event, and no criminal activity was suspected. After that incident, the room experienced repeated electrical issues and water damage. Eventually, it was boarded up and excluded from public bookings. The connecting door had been sealed from the other side, but left intact within Vaughn's room. This information had not been disclosed to Vaughn. Investigators also reviewed Vaughn's phone usage logs more closely. At 11:56, 2 minutes before the photograph was taken, the phone recorded a brief sensor activation consistent with movement. There was no corresponding screen unlock or app usage. At 12:01, the phone powered down without user input. Battery data suggested it had not reached a critical level. Weeks later, while the phone was stored in an evidence locker, it powered on briefly without explanation. Surveillance cameras captured the screen lighting up, though no notification appeared. The device shut off again after several seconds. Phone carrier records later showed a 4-second outgoing call attempt from Vaughn's phone during that event. The call did not connect. The destination number was not recorded. The call was traced to a motel landline associated with Vaughn's room. That landline had been physically disconnected since renovations began. The investigation stalled with no physical evidence explaining Vaughn's disappearance. No sightings were reported, no financial activity occurred after the night he checked in. His vehicle remained parked until it was towed days later. The motel owner chose to permanently close that wing of the building. The adjoining door was sealed behind drywall. Power to the entire section was shut off. Within months, the property was sold. Vaughn Mercer was never found. His case remains open. The photograph remains archived in the case file. It is the only confirmed image showing a man standing calmly inside a motel room that records indicate should have been dark, disconnected, and empty at the time it was taken. This highway turnout appears, then erases people. According to State Transportation Archives, a highway turnout briefly appeared on official maps before multiple travelers connected to it vanished without trace. In late August of 2016, a civil engineering surveyor named Nolan Bricks was assigned to document erosion along a remote stretch of interstate cutting through high desert terrain. Nolan was 43 years old and had spent most of his career evaluating road safety, drainage failures, and shoulder degradation in low-traffic regions. His work often placed him alone on long, empty highways for hours at a time. The assignment that week was considered low risk. Nolan was to drive a 100-mile segment, stop at pre-marked mile points, photograph runoff damage, and log shoulder conditions. The route passed through barren land with minimal development and few exits. Cell service was inconsistent, but Nolan carried a state-issued satellite tracker for emergencies. On Monday morning, Nolan checked in with the regional office and began driving eastbound just after 7. His first 3 stops went as expected. Photos were uploaded during brief service windows, and his tracker showed steady movement along the route. At 10:23, Nolan made an unplanned stop. His vehicle data later showed a turn signal activation followed by deceleration at mile marker 87. There was no scheduled turnout listed there in the survey plan. However, Nolan's dash camera recorded a narrow paved pull-off on the right shoulder, marked by a faded reflective sign reading Scenic Rest. The turnout was small, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles. Beyond it, the desert stretched flat and quiet, broken only by low scrub and distant rock formations. Nolan pulled in, parked, and shut off his engine. He exited the vehicle and walked several steps away, holding his camera. The dash camera continued recording for another 3 minutes. It captured Nolan framing shots of the pavement edge and surrounding ground. At one point, he looked toward the highway with a puzzled expression, then glanced back at the turnout sign. He appeared to check his tablet, then looked up again. At 10:29, Nolan walked out of frame. The dash camera showed only the empty turnout and open desert. The recording ended normally when the vehicle battery entered sleep mode. When Nolan failed to check in at noon, the regional office attempted contact. Calls went unanswered. His tracker showed no movement after 10:30. By mid-afternoon, supervisors initiated a welfare check through Highway Patrol. Troopers reached mile marker 87 just before 5. They found Nolan's state vehicle parked on the shoulder, but the turnout was gone. In its place was a continuous stretch of asphalt with no paved pull-off. There was no sign, no widened shoulder, and no tire marks leading away from the road. The vehicle sat partially on gravel, hazard lights off, doors unlocked. Nolan was not inside. His camera, tablet, and safety vest were on the passenger seat. His keys were in the ignition. There were no signs of a struggle or collision. Troopers searched the immediate area, assuming Nolan may have wandered off due to heat or disorientation. The terrain was flat and offered no cover. Visibility extended for miles. No footprints were found beyond the shoulder. The dash camera footage was reviewed that evening. Investigators confirmed it showed a turnout that did not exist at the location where the vehicle was found. Road design plans, satellite imagery, and maintenance records showed no turnout had ever been approved or constructed at mile marker 87. At first, officials suspected a mapping error or an old removed pull-off. However, asphalt aging patterns on the dash camera footage showed the turnout surface matched the condition of the active highway. There were no seams or signs of demolition. Further review revealed Nolan was not the first to stop there. Archived traffic camera data from previous months showed at least 4 vehicles slowing near the same mile marker, signaling right, then accelerating again without stopping. In 2 cases, brake lights activated fully, then disengaged abruptly, as if the drivers changed their minds at the last second. One case stood out. 6 months earlier, a long-haul truck driver named Everett Malkin had reported pulling into a rest turnout that did not appear on his GPS. He claimed the turnout felt wrong and that his truck stalled briefly before restarting on its own. He did not stop long and reported no incident, but the location matched mile marker 87. Investigators contacted Everett, who confirmed his report. He described the turnout as quiet and oddly clean, with no trash or tire marks. He said the highway noise faded almost completely once he pulled in. When asked why he left, Everett said he felt like staying longer would be a mistake. After Nolan disappeared, the transportation department quietly reviewed accident and missing person reports along the same highway. 2 additional cases surfaced. In 2009, a college student driving overnight was reported missing after last pinging near mile marker 87. His car was found intact 40 miles away at a gas station, keys still inside. He was never found. In 2012, a retired couple traveling cross-country failed to arrive at their destination. Their vehicle was discovered abandoned at a rest stop 2 exits west. Credit card records showed no activity after passing mile marker 87. At the time, none of the cases were linked. Nolan's disappearance forced a closer look. Investigators returned repeatedly to mile marker 87, attempting to document any irregularities. For weeks, nothing appeared. The shoulder remained narrow and uninterrupted. Then, 3 weeks later, during a dawn patrol, a highway maintenance worker named Lyle Corrin reported seeing a pull-off appear briefly in the early light. He described it as a mirage at first, but said it solidified as he approached. Lyle slowed, but did not stop. As he passed the marker, he said the turnout vanished behind him, replaced by normal shoulder. His dashboard camera captured a single blurred frame showing a reflective sign not present in the next frame. That footage was timestamped 6:14 in the morning. State officials closed the investigation publicly, citing lack of evidence. Internally, the site was flagged. Crews were instructed not to stop near mile marker 87 for any reason unless absolutely necessary. Despite this, another incident occurred in 2018. A rideshare driver transporting a passenger across state lines reported that his navigation system rerouted unexpectedly, instructing him to pull over for a rest break. The passenger later told police that the driver slowed near mile marker 87, then suddenly accelerated and refused to explain why. The driver quit the platform weeks later and declined further contact. Satellite imagery reviewed years later showed subtle inconsistencies at the site. On certain dates, the highway shoulder appeared wider by several feet. On others, it did not. The changes did not align with construction schedules or maintenance records. Nolan Bricks was officially declared missing and presumed deceased after 1 year. His family received no explanation beyond the known facts. The state quietly adjusted digital maps, removing any transient data linked to the turnout. Internal memos referred to it only as the transient pull-off anomaly. Today, mile marker 87 remains an unremarkable stretch of highway to most drivers. There is no sign, no widened shoulder, and no reason to slow down. But archived footage, vehicle logs, and witness statements all confirm the same detail. For brief moments, a turnout appears where none should exist. And when someone chooses to stop there, they do not always return. The night guard heard his own voice from an empty floor. According to internal security logs, an audio recording captured a night guard speaking from a floor that was confirmed empty at the time. In early February of 2017, a contracted night security guard named Lucas Wren was assigned to a regional medical storage facility on the outskirts of a mid-sized city. Lucas was 38 years old and had worked overnight security jobs for nearly a decade, mostly at warehouses, office parks, and inactive campuses. His role at the facility was simple. He was to monitor cameras, perform hourly patrols, and report any irregular activity to a central dispatch service. The building was large but quiet. It held archived medical equipment, sealed records, and unused administrative offices spread across 5 floors. Only the first floor remained active during daytime hours. The upper floors were locked, unlit, and officially unused. Overnight, Lucas was the only person inside the building. Lucas began his shift at 10 in the evening. He signed in at the security desk, checked the alarm panel, and confirmed all access points were secure. Camera feeds showed empty hallways and inactive elevators. Motion sensors were armed on floors 2 through 5, set to trigger silent alerts if activated. The first few hours passed without incident.